I deceived and sabotaged my husband's fertility. I got pregnant by my lover and even arranged for his arrest. But my lie was exposed in public, and today I am paying the price for having lost everything. My name is Raquel, I am 34 years old, and I am a nurse at a private clinic here in Querétaro. I am married, or was, to Eduardo, 37 years old, the owner of a small gym downtown. We have been together for almost 5 years, 3 of which we have been trying to get pregnant. The truth is that I never wanted to have children with him. On the outside, we were the ideal couple: smiles on social media, trips to the countryside on weekends, meals with my mother-in-law every Sunday. But on the inside, our marriage was a farce fueled by guilt, routine, and fear. Eduardo has always been an intense man, the kind who gets up at 5 a.m. to go for a run and pack a healthy lunch, even on Christmas. Deep down, I just wanted peace and a little more excitement. He began to suspect when our fertility tests came back, according to him, with excessively good results. Eduardo went to the urologist, after insisting for so long that the problem could be his, and came back telling me that the doctor had told him he was too fertile, almost a genetic aberration. I laughed, feigning surprise, but inside I panicked. As a nurse, I had easy access to everything, including contraceptives. For years I took them secretly, claiming they were vitamins and supplements recommended by doctors. I never imagined he would question it. Until the day everything started to fall apart. He saw me leaving a beauty salon downtown when I had told him I was going to an appointment with the gynecologist. The scene was brief. Me, in a short dress, laughing with the manicurist, getting into the car with freshly styled hair. I thought I had gone unnoticed, but Eduardo's eyes, discreetly hidden in his car half a block away, saw everything. From that day on, the man who shared my bed began to live like a silent stranger, colder, more observant, less available. He started working late, saying he needed to think, but I could see something brewing in his eyes. Eduardo secretly installed a new security system in his house. He said it was because of a series of robberies in the neighborhood, but it was actually a trap. He modified the system himself so he could access it without triggering sensors or alerts. When I discovered the wires in the laundry room closet, I thought it was pure paranoia, but he was smarter than I thought. While I was putting on my domestic act and meeting with Ramiro whenever I could, Eduardo was gathering evidence, pieces of a puzzle that only he knew how to assemble, and he was about to finish it. He found a box of contraceptives hidden inside an old medicine bottle at the back of the desk drawer. He also found 2 new sets of lingerie with the tags still on, and the perfume, a small French bottle with a sweet and provocative scent. He would never give me that because he said he hated cloying smells and, in fact, he had never given me one. It was this detail that made him realize I was lying, not just about the medicine, but about everything. He said nothing. He simply kept smiling and watching, waiting, preparing. What I did not know was that he was just waiting for the right moment, and that moment was about to arrive. In the following days, Eduardo started asking silly questions, like, "Do you have an appointment with the gynecologist this week? Do you need me to take you, or are you going out with the girls again?" Me, convinced that he was still the same fool in love, answered naturally. My mistake was thinking he was still that man who believed everything I said, when in fact he had already stopped believing even my good mornings. And it was there, with that coldness I pretended not to see, that he began to plan how to destroy me. It was a suffocating and silent night, as if the world were holding its breath. I was sure that Eduardo was away on a business trip, so I allowed myself to relax. Ramiro, 42 years old, arrived with his confident demeanor, the one that made me forget I was a married woman, a financial manager, elegant, dominant. The tension between us was inevitable. There was no dinner or long conversation, just a series of anxious kisses that led us straight to the bedroom. The lights were dim, the sheets were at the corner of the bed, the window was ajar, letting in the muffled sound of the street. It was as if the entire world had disappeared. And it was right at that moment that everything exploded. We were at the peak of intimacy. I was on all fours on the bed, on the verge of orgasm, with a pillow over my face to muffle my moans and screams. asking Ramiro to penetrate me harder and faster, surrendering completely, when the door suddenly opened, without warning. No creak, no footstep, just the door wide open. And there was Eduardo motionless, with the iron bar in his hands. His gaze so calm that it hurt. Ramiro barely had time to understand what was happening. He was still behind me when he received the first blunt blow, directly to his abdomen. The impact made him double over, gasping as if the air had been knocked out of him. I, still on my knees, was paralyzed. My mind tried to react, but my body was in shock. I turned to one side, covering myself with the sheet. Ramiro fell to the floor groaning, clutching his stomach as blood began to spread across the wooden floor. Eduardo remained standing, sweating and breathing heavily. He did not blink. When I approached to try to stop him, it was worse. He pushed me forcefully. My body hit the corner of the dressing table, and I screamed. It was then that I felt the blow on my shoulder. The bar grazed me, but it was enough to knock me down. I tried to crawl away, crying, begging, screaming for help, but there were no neighbors listening, only the three of us, trapped in a situation I myself had created. Blood was running down my arm and Ramiro was moaning softly, murmuring things I did not even understand. Eduardo, on the other hand, seemed to be in a trance, as if he had left his body and become something else, colder, more calculating. He took his cell phone from the dressing table, dialed calmly, and spoke as if he were reporting a traffic accident. They broke into my house. There are 2 injured people. Send an ambulance. I tried to tell him it was not like that everything had gotten out of control, but he no longer saw me as his wife. I was just a stranger, a mistake. Suddenly, the room turned into a crime scene. I was naked, covered in blood, trying to keep the towel over my body. Ramiro was curled up, breathing erratically, and Eduardo was sitting in the armchair with a beer in one hand and a bag of peanuts in the other, staring at the wall as if nothing had happened. When the police arrived, he did not get up. He simply pointed to the room with his chin and said, "They are in there, be careful." His coldness was as brutal as the blow, and even with the pain tearing through my shoulder, I knew it. That was only the first scene of our destruction. It took 4 police officers to contain the commotion. Eduardo did not react to the arrest, but he made sure to leave his blood-stained fingers on the beer bottle. While they were attending to me, I heard one of the officers ask, "Was it in self-defense?" And Eduardo replied with sarcasm, "It was love." That phrase haunted me for days. From the hospital to the police station, from social media to the neighbors' rumors, everything I had hidden came to light in a single night. But what I did not know yet was that this would not be the worst punishment, not by a long shot. The hell he was preparing for me was just beginning. The scene of Eduardo's arrest was something that not even I, covered in bruises and trembling with pain, could forget. He was sitting on the sofa when the police entered, shirtless, his fingers still stained with dried blood, a half-empty can of beer, and a bag of peanuts between his legs. The officers came in shouting, with their guns drawn, and he simply raised his hand slowly, as if it were a joke. "You took long enough, huh?" was the first thing he said before taking a long swig of his beer. They took Ramiro away on a stretcher, and I clung to the sheet as if it could protect me from the shame. Eduardo, meanwhile, laughed. They took him away in handcuffs, without him resisting, but the police did not relent. One of them threw him against the hood of the patrol car with such force that he let out a grunt of pain. Another cursed at him as if he had taken the incident personally. Eduardo simply rolled his eyes, still with a mocking expression. "Do not worry, Chief. I know how things work here," he told one of the officers. I, still in shock, was taken by ambulance to the hospital. The test showed that the blow to my shoulder did not break any bones, but it left me with an injury that would stay with me for months. However, the most painful part was psychological. At the police station, Eduardo was locked in a common cell with 3 other men, I was told later. The custody hearing was quick. Without resources, he hired Joel, a low-class, pot-bellied lawyer who had already lost more cases than he had won. They say he arrived late, smelling of alcohol and with an old leather briefcase. Still, Eduardo trusted him. "He is one of the people, like me," he said. The local press picked up the story with enthusiasm. Man surprises wife with her lover and proceeds to brutally assault him, the headlines read. And in the comments, almost no one defended me. He spent almost a month in jail until he was granted bail. It was Eduardo's own father, a simple man from the countryside, who mortgaged part of his farm to pay the required amount. Upon his release, he had lost his job, his credibility, and much of what was left of his dignity. Still, Eduardo seemed calm. The only conditions imposed by the judge were to maintain distance from me and to have no contact of any kind. Meanwhile, I had already returned home, still with my shoulder bandaged, surrounded by gossip and disapproving looks. It was as if I were the criminal. Despite everything, a part of me still believed that Eduardo was not a monster. He was just hurt, humiliated. And I was guilty. I had cheated, lied, deceived. The whole town knew. Social media was already full of indirect messages, and even my mother, who always defended me, avoided commenting. Sometimes I would catch myself remembering his face that night. Not the face of anger, but of pain, the man who loved me and whom I had destroyed. It was this thought that prevented me from imposing a more severe restraining order, a decision I would later pay for dearly. And so, with Eduardo released and unable to approach me, the story seemed to calm down. But it was only the beginning. The authorities had done their part, but no one knew what he would do now, without a job, without a wife, without direction. And it was in this void that a new destiny began to take shape, far from the city, far from me, and in the hands of people I would have never imagined. With his criminal record at the police station and his image ruined on the internet, Eduardo became a persona non grata in practically all of Querétaro. The gym clients canceled their monthly memberships. Parents pulled their children out of the functional training classes. Even the suppliers disappeared. The gym, which he had built with so much effort, became a dump of dust and debt. No company in the city wanted to hire someone with a record of assault. Although part of the public saw him as a betrayed man in a fit of rage, he remained secluded for weeks, sleeping in a small room at the back of his father's house, surviving on what little he had left from his unemployment insurance. But then, Francisco called. Francisco was a former client, a respected farmer and landowner from the Guanajuato region. He had a gruff personality, but he was fair. Upon learning that Eduardo was in a difficult situation, he called him to offer him work on a new project, a sports center for rural youth, a community project he had been wanting to start for years. Eduardo accepted without a second thought. He packed his backpack with 2 changes of clothes and a pair of boots and left. He had only planned to stay there for a few weeks, just enough to organize the project and receive a minimal payment. But the farm had other plans for him, and a presence that would change everything: Isabella. Isabella was 26 years old, the only daughter of Francisco and Mariana. She had grown up in the countryside, but had an urban mentality. She studied in Leon, spoke English, drove a tractor, and knew how to handle cows and men as if they were gloves. She had a beauty that required no makeup, full eyebrows, tan skin, a firm presence. At first, Eduardo was just the project assistant, but she began to take notice of him. His calm attitude, his physical strength, his desolate gaze, and above all, his lack of interest in impressing her. When she discovered his story, told, of course, with the version of a man betrayed and humiliated by his wife, she did not distance herself. Quite the contrary. Their connection was natural, like a river following its own course. They started having coffee together on the porch and then tending to the more restless calves in the late afternoon. Isabella laughed at his urban slang, and he admired the way she faced the workers without losing her composure. The first time they slept together was on a stormy night. Eduardo had returned wet, with his shirt torn from a branch. She treated the wound on his shoulder with such care that he broke down. It was the touch of someone who did not see him as a criminal, but as a wounded man trying to recover. And he clung to that as if it were the last rope before the abyss. Although he knew he was still legally married to me, Eduardo did not hesitate to get involved with Isabella. He said our marriage was already dead and that only a moldy piece of paper remained between us. Isabella, despite knowing the details, did not judge him. Perhaps because deep down she knew he needed something new, and perhaps because she saw in his eyes the longing for a new beginning. In a few days, they were practically living together on the same farm. They ate at the same table, slept in the same room, and shared the tasks of the project. No one in her family found it strange. On the contrary, they seemed relieved that she had finally chosen a real man. While I was still dealing with doctors, psychologists, and rumors behind my back, Eduardo was rebuilding his image in the countryside. There, no one knew him as the guy with the iron bar. There, he was simply Eduardo, strong, hardworking, mysterious, and now with a woman by his side who made him feel complete. Little by little, he seemed to disappear from my life. He did not respond to notifications about the case, nor did he speak at the online hearings. It was as if he had closed a door only from the outside and had left me trapped inside. What began as a temporary refuge on Francisco's farm soon became Eduardo's new home. He and Isabella grew closer and closer, living as a couple without ceremonies or promises. They shared the same rustic mattress with sheets that smelled of soap and the windows always open to the countryside. The mornings began with black coffee and homemade bread, and the days passed slowly among muddy paths, broken fences, and the lowing of oxen. For someone who had known the air conditioning of the gym and urban life, Eduardo seemed to have been reborn there, simpler, rougher, freer. He learned to work the cattle, dig holes with a hoe, weld gates, and dodge barbed wire. He began to fish with Francisco in the stream on Sundays, and on hot days, he swam with Isabella in the pond hidden behind the mango trees. Every week, his muscles hardened again, no longer from the iron bars of the gym, but from the weight of rural life. It was as if the earth had torn the guilt, the anger, and even my name from him. There, no one talked about Raquel, about the betrayal, about the scandal. He was simply Dudu, the strong guy who helped with the cows and built the chicken coop with his own hands. Francisco and Mariana, Isabella's parents, began to admire him. They thought he had good blood and that, despite the problems from the city, he was an honest and hardworking man. Mariana said he reminded her of Isabella's grandfather, tough, but with a good heart. And although he did not get too involved, they both appreciated his closeness. After all, Eduardo was useful. He solved what the workers could not solve. He did not complain about the heat, he was not afraid of hard work, and above all, he treated Isabella with respect. At least that is what everyone saw. There he had become what he could never have been by my side, the man admired by all. Isabella, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Where I was vain and detail-oriented, she was practical and direct. While I would put on makeup to go around the corner, she would walk around with her boots dirty with manure without losing her charm. She knew how to sew the leg of an injured calf with the same skill with which she pushed Eduardo against the barn wall in a silent kiss. She was one of those women who did not need to prove anything to anyone, and precisely for that reason, she got everything. Eduardo, by her side, seemed to have found not only a partner, but a version of himself he never knew with me. Life in the countryside changed him. He began to laugh more, talk less, and sleep deeply. He no longer checked his phone every 5 minutes or followed the malicious comments on social media. He was far from everything he remembered, and that hurt more than any blow with an iron bar. Because seeing someone you hated be happy without you is like a slow-motion death sentence. I watched him from afar, through the few updates that appeared, a photo at a barbecue on the farm, a comment from Isabella on the rural town's profile. It was a new world, and I was no longer a part of it. It was in that silence that I realized. Eduardo was not just trying to forget me, he had already succeeded. And in the middle of that pasture, between fences, cows, and fishing Sundays, he found what I could never offer him. Not luxury or status, but peace. A peace that, ironically, was born from the chaos that I myself had sown. It was a hot afternoon when I made the decision. The physical scars had faded, but inside, the wound was bleeding. Seeing Eduardo happy, free, living with another woman, while I faced glances and judgments daily, was unbearable. Deep down, I felt he could not get away with it, that this needed a different ending. It was then that the plan occurred to me. I called him on the work phone at Ramiro's office, claiming I just wanted to talk, to reconnect, to talk about the past. I pretended to miss him, to cry, to feel fragile. Eduardo responded with a coldness that pierced me. "What do you want now, Raquel?" was the first thing he said. My voice trembled, but it was not from emotion, but from tension. Ramiro was sitting on the other side of the room with the recorder on. "I forgive you," I said. "I think we can still do something. I remember everything, your smell, your touch." Eduardo was silent for a few seconds, perhaps confused. "Go on. But you know I will not forget how Ramiro made me come. He is still bigger than you know." The provocation was surgical, and what came next was exactly what I expected. Eduardo exploded. He screamed into the phone like a caged animal. He threatened, he cursed. He said he was going to make me pay. "You are going to see what real pain is, you bitch." Those were the exact words, said with such anger that Ramiro's eyes widened. I smiled. I had done it. The recording was clear, forceful, irrefutable. A direct violation of the restraining order imposed by the court. As soon as I hung up, trembling, we handed the file to our lawyer. In less than 24 hours, the prosecutor's office had already called the Guanajuato police station. Eduardo, who was returning from a day in the fields, was surprised by 2 patrol cars at the farm gate. He did not resist, but he did not say a word either. He simply looked at Isabella and lowered his head. The news spread with more force than before. Eduardo Silva, arrested again for threatening his ex-wife, the websites announced. But this time, something was different. The public's reaction had changed. Most of the comments said it was a setup, that the story smelled fishy. Some began to wonder why I would call him if I was afraid, why Ramiro was involved again. The prosecutor who took over the case was baffled. It seemed more like a scandal than a lawsuit. Eduardo, from inside his cell, began to realize that something was wrong, and it was then that unexpected help knocked on the door. Isabella did not accept the arrest in silence. She went to her parents, who had contacts, and demanded they hire someone better. Francisco, though reluctant, recommended Clara, a young criminal lawyer known for dismantling unconvincing accusations. Upon receiving the complaint, Clara noticed the inconsistency. The call came from a work phone and seemed rehearsed. She knew something was wrong. And this time, Eduardo had someone by his side who truly believed in him. Isabella was determined to get him out of that cell and, more than that, to unmask everything Ramiro and I had done, because the game had changed and I had no idea what awaited me on the other side of the lie I myself had helped create. Clara was young, but she carried the confidence of someone who had already destroyed reputations in court. When she arrived at the farm with her laptop under her arm and sunglasses on, Eduardo had already been detained for 3 days, silent and tired. Isabella almost begged for help. Clara analyzed the documents in silence. Upon hearing the audio of the call, she frowned. She asked for the phone number from which it came. In less than 20 minutes, she knew. It was a business line registered in the name of the company where Ramiro was a partner. It was the first prick in the bubble. The second would come shortly after, with more force. Clara decided not to act alone. She hired an experienced private investigator, who soon proposed something more than reports, photos. They discreetly hired a local wedding photographer to follow Ramiro's and my steps. In a few days, they had what they needed. There we were, smiling in the parking lot of a cheap motel, sitting on his lap in the car, exchanging kisses that left any story of a work meeting behind. And the worst part, the photos were recent, all taken after my recovery. In other words, after all the public commotion, the emotional testimonies, and the hearings where I swore that Ramiro and I were no longer together. Clara entered the material into the file with surgical coldness. She asked for the images to be shown at the prison review hearing. As soon as the screen showed the first photo of me, hugging Ramiro in the back seat of his car, the whole room gasped. Ramiro tried to hide his face, but it was his wife, sitting in the 3rd row on the right, who broke the silence. She stood up screaming, crying, spitting curses that resonated in the room like thunder. The judge called for order. I remained motionless for the first time. Before all this, I had no words, no excuses. The version we had so carefully crafted fell apart. Ramiro tried to say it was old, but the date printed on the photos was clear. The file captions came with geolocation. Everything was fresh, real, dirty. Clara took advantage of the chaos and filed a request for annulment of the previous case due to evidence tampering and bad faith. She claimed that the audio had been intentionally provoked by me, with the help of Ramiro, violating the principle of procedural good faith. The prosecutor was left without arguments. Even the judge seemed uncomfortable. Eduardo watched everything with the same serenity with which he had been arrested, but now he was a different man, a man about to rise. The repercussions were immediate. Websites that had previously treated me as a victim began to use terms like joke, hoax, set up by my ex. The comments turned against me. They called me manipulative, selfish, and destructive. I could not leave the house without hearing rumors. At work, I was temporarily suspended. At the clinic, patients canceled their appointments. Ramiro was summoned by the company for a conduct reevaluation. Eduardo awaited the new hearing with his head held high because now he had evidence, he had allies, he had a woman who believed in him, and he had everything necessary to turn the tables once and for all. It was at that moment, facing the ruin of my own lie, that I realized Eduardo no longer needed to touch me to get his revenge. He just needed the truth and to let it crush me. The final hearing had more cameras than available chairs. The case was no longer just a local scandal. It was a symbol of betrayal, of revenge, of justice, depending on who told the story. Eduardo entered the courtroom in a borrowed suit, his hair neatly combed, and the expression of someone who was not willing to apologize for anything. I was told to maintain a neutral and discreet posture, but inside my body was trembling. I knew that day could seal what was left of my reputation or destroy, once and for all, the little I still had left. And it was there, before the jury, that each side was heard. In detail, the prosecution tried to argue that Eduardo had acted with clear intent to cause harm, but the defense replied with images, audios, and statements that dismantled my version. They called Ramiro to testify, and his nervousness only made things worse. When asked if he had entered the house or if he had been invited, he hesitated. When shown recent intimate photos of us, he remained silent. The narrative of the professional relationship vanished in that instant. The jury began to sympathize with Eduardo, and even without a guaranteed full acquittal, public opinion was already leaning in his favor. The experts confirmed that Ramiro was physically larger and stronger than Eduardo. The impact of the first blow was consistent with the reflexive defensive action, and Eduardo's words on the phone, "They broke into my house by force," indicated desperation. However, there was a problem, me. The blow to the shoulder, the excessive force, the absence of any real threat on my part. It was then that the judge intervened. He acknowledged that Eduardo had been provoked, betrayed, deceived, but also stated that no emotional state justifies violence against a defenseless person. His words cut through the air like a knife. In the end, the verdict was split. Eduardo was acquitted of the charge of attempted murder but convicted of physical assault. However, the sentence was suspended. The time he had spent in prison, combined with his cooperation with justice and his new behavior since then, led the judge to opt for probation. "But if there is any reoccurrence, you will go straight back to prison," the judge warned. Clara thanked him with a slight nod. Isabella, present at the hearing, squeezed Eduardo's hand tightly. I sat alone. What had once seemed like a one-war was now just a field of rubble, and I was the biggest piece. A few days later, our divorce was finalized. Neither of us showed up in court, only our lawyers. Since I had already returned to work and my salary was higher than Eduardo's, I was not entitled to alimony, nor did I even want to contest it. At that moment, the only thing I wanted was to disappear. I went home, deleted the last photos from Instagram, and stopped wearing makeup. Even my smile changed. Ramiro tried to find me, but I did not want anyone else near me. I could only feel guilty and be silent. Eduardo, on the other hand, left the courthouse with a clean record, at least before the law. But his revenge was not over yet, and it would come in the most unexpected and painful way I could imagine. Eduardo's return to the farm was like a scene from a soap opera. The car had barely stopped when Isabella ran towards him as if it were the last hug in the world. He dropped his suitcase on the ground and held her with both arms as if that gesture was enough to erase everything he had been through. Francisco greeted him from the porch with a slight smile. Mariana cried softly, and that same night, with the starry sky and the aroma of freshly baked cornbread, Eduardo came back to life. But this time, without me, without my secrets, without my lies, without my presence. It was as if I had died and he had been reborn. 2 days later, Isabella sat next to him on the porch, with a hand on her belly, and told him, "You are going to be a father." Eduardo was speechless. Then he smiled. A smile so sincere that it hurt me inside when I found out. We had been trying to get pregnant for years, or rather, he tried, I sabotaged it, and now, without effort, without treatment, without drama, he succeeded. The cruelest blow was that he did not have to fight for it. Life simply gave it to him. He who used to cry with every negative test was now drying his eyes from laughter. They were building something together. With love, with truth, with everything that I destroyed. The news of the baby spread. Francisco gave his blessing. Mariana was already planning the layout, and Eduardo began to design an outdoor training center right there in the countryside. The city, the gym, and the digital routine were over. The past was buried along with me. Isabella, with that strength that only country women have, began to plan a veterinary clinic on the property, and they both became a local symbol of new beginnings and overcoming adversity. It was as if everything had been a great cycle, and I was just the mistake needed for that new chapter to be born. But life still had a punishment in store for Ramiro. After being fired for malpractice, he tried to open a small financial consulting firm. He failed in 2 months. His ex-wife spread our photos on social media, and the lawsuit for emotional abandonment cost him dearly. He lost his apartment, his car, and his clients. He went back to live with his sister in a small house on the outskirts. He suffered a mild stroke caused by stress, which partially paralyzed the left side of his face. He never spoke clearly again. Today he lives in fear of going out, ashamed of being recognized. That elegant and powerful man who once made me feel alive can now barely eat without drooling. My reputation also vanished. I was expelled from the clinic, and no patient sought me out. Mothers did not want me to see their children. Husbands looked the other way. Wives whispered. Ramiro and I, who tried to destroy Eduardo's image with lies, ended up ruined by our own truths. The irony, he did not even have to touch us anymore. He just lived. He was happy, and that destroyed us completely. Because sometimes revenge does not come with blood, it comes with silence, with overcoming, with a smiling photo in the newspaper that you look at and feel that you have lost everything. And now I ask you who are listening to me up to this point, did I deserve all this, or did he take his revenge too far? Because in the end, I just wanted to feel alive again, and now I cannot even do that.